Hello, everybody, and welcome to Future Nonprofit, the podcast and YouTube channel where we talk with nonprofit practitioners and industry experts about how to build and scale the nonprofit of tomorrow. I'm Ted Vaughn, partner at Historic, host of Future Nonprofit, and I cannot wait for you to check out this episode with Rodney Evans. Rodney Evans is co-host of the Brave New Work podcast and partner at The Ready. She is responsible for many of the most profound organizational culture and dynamic and structural shifts happening across the globe. It's going to be a profound episode, and other episodes are as profound, so check them out on Google or Apple or Spotify or wherever you listen to fine podcasts. Join me as we talk with innovative leaders about how to build and scale and shape the nonprofits our world needs tomorrow. Rodney, so grateful to have you. You are a rock star in our space, in our world of consulting and the organizational health and all of the dynamics that surround that. Can't imagine a better guest, and grateful to have you on the show. To kick things off, wanted to just ask some kind of fun, crazy questions. You're a world traveler. You've been lots of places. You seem to have a passion for travel. What is the most amazing place, as narrow as possible, that you've been to or experienced or seen, and why?
Wow. That's hard. You're really throwing me right in the deep end with the preamble of "you're gonna be great" and then a question that is impossible to answer.
These are the easy questions
right off,
too.
Right
These are the easy questions. Wait till we get hard.
Okay. I have two. Sorry.
Great.
There's two. One time my husband and I were in Tasmania, and we went to the southernmost tip of Tasmania where we were on the last foot of land before the Arctic Sea.
The end of the world.
Pretty
you were
cool.
At the end of the world.
I was at the end of the world. It was very cold, very windy, but there was something about it that felt like existentially special to me. And same trip, different part of same trip. We got married on Rarotonga, which is in the Cook Islands. And we spent a month there. We sort of had a little bet between us. My husband claimed that I would get bored of being at a beach. And I was like, well, you apparently don't know me that well, because I cried on the way to the airport. And that was just it was pretty magical. You know, Rarotonga, I haven't been back since. This was more than 10 years ago. But at the time, there was one road and there were two buses, and one was the clockwise bus and the other was the anti-clockwise bus. And there was a jungle in the middle that you could hike across. And it felt like a magical place.
Great answer, and I envy the fact that you've had those experiences, because I have such a passion for travel and seeing new places, and that sounds unbelievable. You also strike me as more of a adventure, coastal, in the wild versus city urban landscape. Is that right? Do you tip more in that direction, or do you like cities? Like, would you rather go to the Cotswolds, or would you rather go to London?
I can't ever decide. You know, I lived in Manhattan for 12 years, and now I live in Durham, which is still North Carolina, which is still a city. I do find that it's still a city, like, you know, it's city light. But
Gotcha. Yeah.
I find now that I'm older and like crankier and require more comfort than I did when I was young, that the vacation has to sort of match where I'm at emotionally or like energetically. So a lot of times, like if work has been a little bit quieter or a little more spacious or a little bit less exciting, I want to go to London. And if work has been mayhem, like I am going a week from Sunday to a like wellness retreat 2 hours outside of Los Angeles, no phones, no alcohol, like no interaction with human beings, by myself. So it just, you know, which probably tells you something about how my job has been lately.
It sounded amazing until you said no alcohol, and then all of a sudden, like it lost the luster. But you know what? Maybe there's a place for a vacation without alcohol. I'll have to.
I'm gonna find out.
I'll have to explore that possibility. I'm not sure.
Goes.
It doesn't really fit into my paradigm, but.
You're not going to the Adele show sober.
Alcohol is my number one hobby, so I would say travel and alcohol kind of vie for first place. So
they go great together, honestly.
They really
I understand.
They really do.
I understand.
All right, last icebreaker, just to keep it fun. There's a musical instrument that I think is a cello behind you. is that your cello? Do you play cello? Are you a string instrument person?
That is my cello. That cello's name is Marcel. It is
Ooh.
like 175 years old.
Holy
And
mackerel.
I was a very serious cellist growing up. And now I play for fun. But I was on a path to potentially become a professional cellist until college, when it was like, am I going to conservatory or am I going to a regular university? And mostly the decision was made with the help of my mom, who was like, you enjoy expensive things. Do you know how much classical musicians make? And are you planning on living on that? Which did tip, it did tip the scales. And I ended up, I did play music in college, but I went to a regular university.
Your working journey, you've had quite a journey. It's brought you to this amazing place where you add tremendous value to organizations in ways that often organizations don't even know they need value added. What's the journey that's taken you from corporate to this?
Yeah. Mostly frustration and disappointment and heartbreak is the journey.
Got it.
You know, I got really good jobs out of school, and honestly even internships and things like that. I was very fortunate. You know, I grew up in a place where I had contacts through family, and even though my grades were not always amazing, I was always a really good worker. Like, I always have excelled at work, even if academically or in other places I was, a little lazy. And I had this feeling about 10 years into my career of like, I have gotten the things that people want to get. Like, I am on the path that I worked to be on, and it was deeply dissatisfying. And it became really clear to me that this sort of traditional ladder climbing, title seeking, wealth creating thing was not going to do it for me, because in the environments I was working in, there was not room for a lot of creativity, a lot of autonomy. There was always discussion about new ideas and new ways of working and new things to try. And then there wasn't really an ability to influence much or to do much. And I think a big tipping point for me was I worked at an investment bank, and the last year that I was there, I worked on a couple of pretty big transactions. So like the selling of a business and what I realized in getting to see due diligence from that perspective, I had seen it from other angles before, is that where things fall apart, whether you're talking about a change management initiative or M&A or a programmatic approach to performance management or anything sort of big system-y, is in the system design. It's in the how. It's not that the people are lazy. It's not that they're stupid. It's not that they're not trained well. It's not that the plan is flawed. It's that we're working in complexity, and there's no attention paid to how we are actually going to work differently when we sell this business, or when we do this performance plan, or when we try this change initiative. We think that the content of the thing will get us the juice, and it won't. And so I just got to a point of frustration where I was like, I can't do this anymore. And then I quit my job, and then I married my husband, and we traveled around the world for a year. And when I came back, I sort of fell into doing a lot of coaching work. I worked at the McChrystal Group as their chief innovation officer. My team did a lot of the research behind the book Team of Teams. And in many ways, like that job, which frankly, like a friend of mine was running the company at the time, which is how I ended up there. I didn't know anything about what they were doing. But that job was my like Alice in Wonderland moment into the future of work, because I had the luxury for a few years of budget and freedom, and someone saying like, go figure out what an adaptable organization is. Go figure out what the skills under adaptive leadership are. And I mean, that's a dream. And so it was basically like 2 years of education for me in what the future should be.
I love the fact that you and I have had very parallel journeys, except mine's been in the nonprofit space, where the dysfunction and the milieu is very different than corporate finance or big,
Sure.
And I often envy that space that you've been in, because I remember thinking, wow, that space is the real world. It's where the real stuff gets done. It's where the real hard work is. And I have come to find nonprofits are some of the hardest organizations on earth to lead effectively, because some of them have all these tensions where it's professional, it's personal, it's missional, it's in some cases spiritual, and that chaos of tension often makes being employed by one really difficult. Have you had much experience, or do you have much kind of hands-on experience in that nonprofit space? Has that been a part of your journey either recently or in the past?
Some, but not a ton. I have a lot of friends who work in nonprofits. Durham, North Carolina is a very like social justice epicenter of the US. And so I have had some experience, but I've never done like a long project with a nonprofit. But everything that you're describing sounds exactly right. And it's been interesting for me in the moments that I've been around nonprofits or advising friends who are, executive directors, that in some cases, I think the mission orientation and the clarity of purpose does actually make it harder. Like it's better, but I think that that coherence around the purpose can really paper over a lot of the systemic dysfunction.
It's so true, and it can often lead to a whole level of unintentional exploitation, where people are so willing to bleed for the cause, and we become so as senior leaders, we become so used to their willingness to bleed for the cause that we then bake that into our expectations for them, and performance management or supervision or development, often don't even happen because there's just an assumption that you care deeply and you're doing this, and we don't have to really worry about those things.
Interesting. Yeah.
Presumptiveness, and I'm sure you see that as well. I mean, supervision, performance management, cultivating the soil of the organization so that everything grows more effectively is such a battle. Do you typically have to convince or help senior leadership see the need for that? Or are they coming to you when there's a pain point and they're already at a place of desperation?
Both. So what's funny about your question is, a lot of times leaders do come because of pain they're feeling and then also need to be convinced of what needs to change. So, it's human nature, right? It's like, this hurts, and then you go to the doctor and the doctor says, do exercises. And you're like, that's not actually what I wanted to hear. And so, we hear all kinds of tensions and pain points from leaders. And then when we say, okay, well, the way out of this is to change how you're working. We need to change how you're meeting, change how you're tooling, change how you're making agreements, change how you're making decisions, change how you're steering strategy. And they're like, whoa. I thought you were going to give me a PowerPoint deck. And I'm like, dude, I'll give you one, but that's not going to change anything for you. And so, so my answer to your question is they know what the pain is, and they also often require some convincing of the solution.
What are the most common symptoms that you see in the organizations or in the leaders that you work with? Are there like things that you almost know predictably you're going to experience or see walking into an engagement?
Yes. I think that there's like a polarity here of, we talk a lot about in organizations, on one end of a spectrum, you have bureaucracy. And usually in bureaucracy, there is too much complication. So the pain points that you hear in bureaucracy is like, we're spending our time servicing the bureaucracy and like servicing the policies and the dumb stuff that all of the constraints and rules that we've made for ourselves that don't really contribute. That's on one end of the spectrum. And on the other end of the spectrum, where you have really like early or high growth or DAOs or whatever, you have like chaos. And so I always joke, like, on like the chaotic end, it's like a body with no bones. And so it's just a mess. And so the pain points there tend to be more like, we have an influencing culture. We don't know who can say yes to things. There's no clear way that decisions get made. Information isn't transparent. And the reasons behind those things are often different at the ends of the spectrum, but the symptoms, still appear.
When you're working with senior leaders and you're helping them see what they can't see, you're helping them realize things that need to change, I would assume at some point you experience resistance, or you experience senior leaders wanting to trivialize this moment or say, no, it's not as big as you think it is.
Yeah.
How do you overcome that? How do you help them see the challenge, or maybe it's the opportunity cost that they have trouble seeing, and get them over the hump so that they're willing to engage or do the hard work or move forward?
Yeah. I mean, my answer to this has probably changed in the last 3 or 4 years. Cause I used to, I get, especially from practitioners who are earlier in their careers, I get questions about this a lot. And a lot of the advice that I've provided at the Ready over the last 7 years has been like, what do I do with this team that is, stuck or in resistance? And I sort of have this like arsenal of moves of like, how to shift people. And right now in this moment, I feel like there is a universal exhaustion taking place. And like a lot of people for a lot of reasons have been in survival mode for the last bunch of years. And there's just been like so much environmental chaos. And now I just mostly take the tact of like, your resistance is rational. I understand. You don't have to do anything. But if you don't, then you have to stay here. And this is the choice that you're making. You tell me what you want to do. And I've just sort of like started to lean back because honestly, I'm tired of people trying to convince me of stuff too right now. It's like, I think our adrenals are burnt out and we've made it through the last bunch of years and we've had to adapt to so many changes that we weren't expecting. And I'm just not in the business of like nudging too hard right now.
What a great and I think mature insight into the culture we're in. And it's not getting better, right? The echo chambers, the way in which we're sharing our thoughts on things on social media is very rarely delicate and thoughtful and inclusive, right? And yet there's this huge DEI movement. And yet in so many ways, culture seems to be going the other direction. And organizations and leadership and culture are just kind of caught in this crazy moment. And I really appreciate the maturity. In light of that, the pace of change. Things are moving faster than ever before. Innovation has never been more necessary. We often work with leaders who confuse adaptation, responding to crisis, as innovation. Talk a little bit about how you define innovation and how you understand the difference between adapting or responding to crisis versus a posture of innovation and change.
It's interesting because I don't know that I would draw a line in quite the same way as you describe. The work that we do on systems is with the intention of creating systems that are more adaptive and more human. And what we mean by adaptive is a term that my business partner Aaron coined in Brave New Work, which is complexity conscious. What we want to see is complex organizations that are conscious of their complexity. And what we mean by that is that they don't have such calcified structures and systems and org charts and ways of working that they can't shift when the environment shifts. So that's what I would consider an adaptive system. And to me, adaptation requires experimentation, and experimentation is almost always innovation. So I sort of think of those things as birds of a feather. What I don't particularly love to see, just like I don't like to see change or transformation separated from the work, I don't like to see innovation separated from the work. Like I'm a big believer in trying new things in the context of where the customer is, where the product's being developed, and having a portfolio of bets or innovations or of experiments that are being run, and understanding some of them are going to be incremental and some of them are going to be really big swings, and that's what a healthy innovation portfolio should be. But to me, the adaptive system is required to be able to do that work well. Because otherwise you end up with an innovation office of like weirdos in a different campus with, like on beanbag chairs, like just thinking about the future. And there's nothing wrong with that. I've been one of those weirdos, but it's really hard to integrate what they come up with and make 100%. Use of it, even if it's amazing.
I really received that pushback on the separation of adaptation. I think I adopted that mindset because I saw so many senior leaders say, we're innovators, because they just reacted to crisis and did things they should have been doing 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, I don't know that adaptation in this moment means that you have a posture of innovation to keep it going. But I love the innovation portfolio concept. I just wrote that down. What What is your current portfolio of innovation? Where are you taking risks? How are you taking risks? How does that play out? I love that idea. Such gold. Let's talk about the role of senior leadership in supporting, sustaining, creating a culture of innovation. Where do you see senior leaders really cultivate soil that allows for that? And where do you see them shut it down or perhaps, crush innovation?
So there are a few things I would start with for senior leadership. I think you have to have some kind of methodology in the team for how you are doing experiments. So a lot of times when I talk to leaders about experimentation, they're like, shh, we don't like this. Like, you're freaking me out. And then once they get into the work of really doing looping, like really sensing what attention or opportunity is, really defining what a clarified, time-bound, safe-to-try experiment is, really reflecting and learning, shedding what's not working, scaling what is working. Generally, then the feedback is like, oh, this is actually far more disciplined than the way that we usually do this, but they have a little bit of an allergy to experimentation. So first and foremost, leaders I often hear say that they want innovation and even maybe say that they want experimentation, but the lived experience of not having a plan is deeply unsettling for them. And it's like, you're just not going to plan your way into experimentation. Like you have to take the approach of having a hypothesis, having a clear way of testing it, and understanding that if it's a good hypothesis, if it's an interesting hypothesis, then it has the possibility to fail. And I see too many leaders that are like, yeah, experimentation, but we only want winners. And it's like, well, that's not how innovation happens.
Right.
That's not how the ice cream cone was invented. Like, you're going to have to do some stuff that feels counterintuitive or that feels like it potentially contradicts best practice or existing strategy, because otherwise you're going to get incremental improvement. And there's nothing wrong with that. But sure. I remember we had Bill Anderson, who was the CEO of Roche, on our podcast. And he's just done like some really, really interesting things at Roche over the years. And he told this story about how he was challenging his executive team to come up with a better way of budgeting. He was like, I feel like our budgeting process is stifling innovation, which incidentally is true of almost every company I've ever worked in. And he sort of laid out this challenge to this group of very smart people. And what they came back with was something that was incrementally more efficient and more flexible than what they were doing. And he was like, you know what? No budgets. We got to just get rid of them and start from zero, because we're never going to get to something that's innovative if we start anchored to the way that we've always done it. So I say that to say, I think a lot of what is required from senior leadership is a mindset that like, they can't all be winners. Failure is an actual thing. I feel like particularly the tech industry loves to talk about failure and actually only celebrates like wild success in a way that just doesn't really like square for me. And then I think the hardest thing that I have a lot of compassion for is I've worked with a number of very senior leaders who are on the hook for delivering innovative solutions within their function, and their leadership does not want to see failure or waste or delays. They want you to be really, really creative, on time and on budget, and have 10 out of 10 be experiments that move the portfolio forward. And I think it's really hard to be in that position where you're trying to hold space for your team to like get wild while you have all this external pressure that's like missteps will not be tolerated.
Let's talk about what some of the practical steps are to sustaining innovation, because I often will work with leaders who, in a moment of great pain or great opportunity cost, will tolerate innovation, but then it's atrophy or recoil back to the normal posture of Six Sigma continuous improvement. Nothing wrong with all those things, but they often don't leave a lot of room in the margin for innovation. How do you see organizations of any size create structures and systems that help keep them in a mindset of innovation?
Yeah. So we talk a lot in our work about containers and creating the containers in a team or system for particular types of work. So what kind of pisses me off is when people just talk about mindsets, but there's no system design to hold the mindset. It's like, act like an owner. Like, what does that mean? Like, what am I supposed to do? Like, what does that mean on Monday, me acting like an owner? Like, it just feels manipulative. Anyway, that was an aside. If you're trying to do an innovation thing, I'm like, okay, where are we putting that? So are we doing, as a team, are we doing something like a monthly retrospective where we talk about what's gone on and talk about how the experiments from the last month have played, and then generate new tensions and new experiments? Like, how are we reflecting and learning and integrating as a team? That's a big one. How are we sensing what is happening in the ecosystem? A lot of times we get called in to do workshops, and there will be a question about, the broader market or innovation or externalities. And there's not a lot of muscle in a lot of systems for like, what is happening out there that you should be paying attention to? And frankly, I think it creates a lot of paranoia. People are like, oh, Chat GPT, like everyone is saying that means something for my business. What does it mean? Rodney, what does it mean? And I'm like, well, what is the container for us to talk about Chat GPT with the team? Where is the meeting? Where is the place? Where is the team? Where is the project where we can run 10 one-week experiments using ChatGPT in our work and then come back together and reflect on what we learn? Like, we have to have a place to put it, or else it's just noisy and stressful.
Or it always feels like you're force-fitting new ideas when new ideas should be welcome and a regular part of our discussion.
Totally.
Versus you bring up ChatGPT and everybody rolls their eyes.
Yeah.
Because it's like, here we go again. When really the person doing that is taking a risk and appropriately helping add value to their organization. But because it's something new or it's hard or it takes us out of our routine, we resist it, right? And changing that element of the cultural soil seems so challenging.
Yeah. And to that exact point, I think that separating, whether you're talking about meetings or you're talking about Slack channels or you're talking about working agreements, just like, let's be really clear and really explicit about what we are doing, where and when. Because if I'm in my weekly team action meeting that's just about moving work forward, it is annoying when someone brings up ChatGPT. I'm like, shut up. What do you want me to do with this right now? But in an innovation meeting, if someone is like, can I get a status update on that project? I'm like, no, that's not what we're doing here. What we're doing here is talking about AI and DAOs and Web3 and crypto and China and pandemics. And like, let's get clear on what we're doing, both so that we have places for different kinds of work to be held, but also so that we can show up to it. We talk a lot about working agreements, and Erin and I are writing a new book right now that's all about making agreements in teams. And one of the things that we really emphasize is like, working agreements are just how a group makes its own rules. And you can't have a game without rules. You just have a group of people doing stuff. And so it's like, what are the rules of the game for innovation so that we can all show up and play?
Preach. We talk all about, in our book, Culture Built My Brand, principles, abstract core values that are blurry and broad, that allow people to hide or, to your point, manipulate, do not help people if they're not actionable, right? If what you do is who you are, you have to begin to have rules and ideas and things. I mean, the irony is that great innovation often requires incredible discipline.
Yes.
You don't just decide to flip a switch and then the same muscles that you've been strengthening for years are now strong. You have to strengthen new muscles, which requires agendas and things that actually give you disciplined focus. I love compartments, and this is where your book and The Ready is so fantastic at helping equip organizations on how to actually make this happen and not just have it be rhetoric, because there's so much rhetoric out there.
And the other thing, just on the innovation thing, is when I've done some of this work in companies, what is always really heartening and really interesting is when you give people a container and you say, I remember facilitating an innovation session for a client, and they were really unhappy with their mobile app. And I was like, okay, we're going to do this session and I'm going to use this kind of facilitation and blah, 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 blah. We're going to do some warm up stuff to get creative. But in the 2 weeks before, I want you guys to do a little bit of research and download a few e-commerce apps. They don't need to be in your space. We're not looking at competitors. I just want you to find the best ones and just be in them a little bit between now and then. And when we came together, I remember the leader of this session being like, these people are not innovative people. And the truth was, no one had really asked them to think in these ways very specifically, or to bring their opinions to bear, or to look critically at the product that they were building. And when we got to a session and they had spent 2 weeks in the Nordstrom app, they had super hot takes and super smart contributions and like made huge pivots in an afternoon that, I think we just underestimate people.
Oh boy. Yeah, we could do a whole new show on the ways in which senior leaders underestimate the horsepower of the people they lead and create systems that are designed to mitigate their horsepower instead of unleash it.
Exactly.
I mean, command and control leadership and all the things I'm sure that you've addressed. If you were talking to a new leader of an organization who is getting ready to hire significant numbers of staff and actually go from kind of a boutique solo show to they've gotten an investment of capital, maybe a big donation to their nonprofit, and now they're going to scale up. What would be the 2 or 3, or it could be more, or 1 principles or ideas or things that you would say, whatever you do, don't forget this. This is the most important thing in this journey of going from just you to team and structure.
Well, there's a lot in that question. I actually, if it's cool, I want to talk about the hiring part first, because I see leaders all the time get a cash infusion and they're just like, let's bring on a bunch of bodies, and then they do a bad job at that. I think the thing that I would invite people to be immediately disabused of, that I had to also learn, is like, your bias in hiring does not serve you well. Like, people think that they are the one who can just have the right best read on fit and it's just not true. It's just not true. Like, and it, putting the Jedi implications of hiring processes to the side for a second, though I'd be happy to talk about them. The fact that leaders often get an infusion of cash and then just go hire a bunch of people who look like them and think like them and make them feel comfortable usually doesn't go super well in the longer term. So my first ask would be, get super, super clear on the skills that you actually need and hire for that, not the person that you want to have a beer with. And that's like an unpopular opinion with a lot of people. But what I have learned from growing companies myself is a lot of the people that have contributed outsized value were not the people who were my best friends. They were the people who could contribute something that I and my buddies really couldn't. And so I think you have to just get super, super clear on that.
Well, and just to stay on that too, going back to our earlier conversation about diversity, even brands that we work with that talk all about, innovation and all about change and differing perspectives, you look at the people in the room and go, well, there's no diversity of experience or ethnicity or age or gender. So how much diversity are you getting? How much innovation are you capable of if the people in the room don't bring any type of different experience to the table?
Exactly. Yeah, I think that's exactly right. So, and there are cool ways of getting around that and getting to that. Like, we started experimenting at The Ready many years ago with tooling that is a completely anonymized process, and no resumes, no identifying feature. Skills-based applications with short answer words and a scoring rubric that we really adhere to. So it's not just like, this person seems smart, wave them through. It's like, these are the demonstrations of the skills that we're looking for. And so the right people get through, not necessarily the people that like we're the most excited about or like, just think are going to be a great fit. And I think for scaling something, that's super, super important, because I think if you get too many people who are too similar, it's really hard. It's just really hard to make a go of any business.
Yeah, well, and just the cost of hiring poorly or realizing after 6 to 12 months that you've made a bad hire, and the amount of sideways energy It's an unbelievable problem. That's beautiful gold. What else would you tell that leader who's getting ready to scale? Infusion of capital, you've gotten them kind of calibrated on hiring and process and diversity. What else what other seed would you plant in their mind?
I would say that it's really easy when you're scaling quickly to ignore the how of work and to feel like you can just be really organic in terms of how communication happens or how decisions get made. And I do understand that feeling, like especially when you have a certain amount of like investment runway, or you're trying to find product market fit and you don't have it, or it's hard. It's really hard to be at that phase of a company. But what I find is a lot of startup founders and CEOs who are trying to scale are really unwilling to spend any time thinking about, we should write down some roles. We should clarify some decision rights, like who can say yes to what, so that every single decision about the business isn't coming to the CEO. We should think about our meeting structure, and we should make time to get together and have a productive meeting. I know you can't overdo it when you are trying to scale something and there is pressure and urgency. And if you don't build any of that scaffolding at the beginning, it gets hard later. It gets really hard later. It gets hard to go from something that is like just an amoeba to being like a body with a skeleton. And so I'm always a fan of like minimum viable structure. Like, what are the minimum team agreements, ways of working, clarified roles, decision rights that your team needs to function? And if you have any constraints or rules or agreements written down that you don't actually need, get rid of them. Like, don't service anything that you don't need, but don't ignore the fact that like human beings do need rules to play a game, and creating those in a participatory way will get you outsized value.
Let's bridge that comment right into the heart of HR. There are lots of changes to HR in organizations. What are some of the trends or changes that you're seeing take place in how HR supports a culture and adds value to all that we've been talking about?
Yeah. So what's interesting is that we are coming to market with a future of HR offering really soon. And to be totally honest with you, we have avoided that for a long time because of how screwy HR is.
Yeah, bureaucratic and layered and weird.
Yeah, it's just a mess. And I was in HR. I have a lot of empathy for those people. And fundamentally, what I think is problematic about most HR organizations is that they are designed on two competing agendas. So on the one hand, they are about mitigating risk, responding to the business, compliance, et cetera. And they're also on the hook for like understanding the future of work and a seamless employee engagement and like, getting the best talent and blah, 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 blah.
Cultural health.
Yeah, exactly. Like if I'm an HR business partner or a CHRO and I am equally responsible for both of those things and I have, 8 to 10 hours in my day, I'm probably not doing either of them well. And generally speaking, what I find is that HR organizations they sort of default to doing the more operational, the more blocking and tackling, because the time and space and mindset and buy-in for doing the strategic work is really, really hard to come by. So that's what I think the problem is. I think I think the trend is that there is a huge realization of what that problem is, that HR organizations are not generally set up to create a great employee experience. And if the employees are fundamentally the customer of HR, we are seeing a moment where employees have a much louder voice and much more outsized power and opinions and vote with your feet attitude than we have in a really long time. So I'm seeing most of the trends that I'm seeing right now are the things that you would expect. It's like more automation in HR, more focus on employees, more human-centered design, more collaborating with the business or getting closer to the business. What I'm not seeing, which is why we decided to like really, put a mile marker down on this, is answers to actually how to do any of those things. And so to me, just continuing to point out what's wrong with that function is like unfair to them and also just yelling at the sky. And so that's why we're now like here, we've created like a 5 sort of a 5-step maturity model that's like, this is where you probably are. This is where you should probably go next. And if you're wild, over time, you can be like a hire and have microservices and be a revenue generating center, et cetera, et cetera. And the boldest will get there.
I love it. It's taking the ready and making it a practical linear journey to move you forward.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
Oh my gosh.
Exactly.
I'm so in love and jelly about all these things that you're doing. It's so incredible. I just want to go work for you tomorrow. Let's talk just for a moment about the nonprofit space and this idea of employee branding. So mission-driven organizations with people who are sacrificial and bleeding for the cause and probably working under market value, they need to be in an environment that offers them value beyond the compensation, right? So employee branding, being in an environment that says we see you, we care about you, we understand the sacrifices that you're making, we love you. That's important in the for-profit space and the nonprofit space, but I know nonprofit leaders are really wrestling with that in today's difficult to hire culture that we're in. What are some of the best practices or thoughts that you have around employee branding, offering value to employees within the larger organizational culture?
Okay. I'll tell you a couple, and then I would love to hear what you see because you're closer to nonprofits than I am. And I'd love to hear what you see working. I often do this. I do some work with Fuqua down the road here at Duke. And a lot of times students after I speak will be like, they're because I work for a big consulting firm and then I work for investment banking. First, they're like, how do I get a job in one of those companies? And I'm like, don't do it. And then they're like, okay, well, what should I be asking in interviews to know if it's if it's a people positive and complexity conscious culture like you're describing? And the big questions that I would be asking is, how are decisions made? How can I know what decisions I can make without advice? How much flexibility do I have in how I work? What are the constraints? Those are the kinds of things to me. Basically, offerings around agency are so important. And you have to meet people's basic needs. And if you're paying them less than a living wage, then there's something seriously wrong with how things are working. But regardless of how people are being paid, I think creating choice is more important than creating a brand. And it being clear to an employee that they will be treated like an adult who is an agentic adult and who has the freedom to work the way that they want to within reasonable bounds is the best possible brand you could have.
That is such gold. There are so many tweetable nuggets that just came out of that last statement. You asked the question about the nonprofit space. I think it's the exact same. I think often, maybe even more acute in that people work in a nonprofit because they care. They have ideas, passion. They want to be a partner. They want to be seen as being shoulder to shoulder in this work and not treated like, a sub-bullet of a sub-bullet of a sub-bullet on an assembly line. Right. But often the command and control style of leadership echoes and reverberates in the nonprofit space, and we end up seeing really antiquated ideas that are completely antithetical to what you endorse and believe, and that actually prevents people from feeling like they're partnered or they're valued or their voice matters, right? And I think it runs completely contrary to why they're involved. They're involved because they want to have a voice, because they have input, they want to innovate and take risks and push the cause forward. So.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So here's my org design nerdery comes out. When I hear something like that, what I would want to say, a practice that I would want to adopt if I were a nonprofit leader would be something like giving every employee spending authority of up to some amount of money that we can afford every month to experiment in pursuit of purpose.
Yes.
And if I'm interviewing for a nonprofit and I want all the things that you just described, I want to ask a question that's like, if I have an idea that I believe will make progress toward our purpose, how could I run an experiment?
So good. Such great takeaway advice. So let's talk about where you're going next. You've already covered such incredible ground. You've done incredible work. You've offered tremendous value, but you're not slowing down. What does innovation and change look like in your world, and what are you chasing, and what should we expect from you in the next 2 to 3 years?
I'm glad you asked, Ted. Yeah, we have some pretty big aspirations for the next few years. So Aaron and I have a podcast that's called Brave New Work. We are always thinking about how to continue to evolve that, and we have some pretty exciting ideas for the rest of this year. We are also working on a book, as I mentioned, which will likely be released in 2024, that will be all about agreement making. And at the ready, there are two big things that are underway right now that I'm super excited about. One is offerings like the Future of HR. Rather than trying to change ways of working just through coaching new ways of working, taking more of a perspective on where an organization should be heading, in our opinion, based on what we know about the future of work. And we are doing more and more work around product and content so that we can serve more organizations that aren't huge. So because we tend to work with the Fortune 500, because of complexity and budgets and appetite and things like that, we leave a lot on the table in terms of organizations that really need this work and really want this work. And so we are now really for the first time trying to figure out what the bundles of product and service and content offerings are that are more accessible to different market segments.
Hey, thank you again. I am incredibly honored, such a fanboy of yours and the work that you and everything about The Ready has been transformative. And I use these cards so often with clients. They've
Awesome.
been so helpful.
Thanks so much, Ted. This was really fun.
For more stories from experts in the industry and to learn how to take your nonprofit into the future, like this video, subscribe to our channel and podcast, and visit makehistoric.com/insights. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Ted Vaughn, and this is Future Nonprofit.